Hi, this is Samantha Bradbury again, back with the Earth Science session, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit about probing for understanding. When we talk about misconceptions, it's important as science teachers especially that we clear up any invalid, faulty, incorrect thinking that might be floating around in our classroom. It's also important to take a look at our kids and what they already know, and that we can find through the Texas TEKS, or TEKS, whichever you might say it, as well as giving them some kind of formative assessment to see what maybe they already know, what they don't know, which would be gaps in learning, and what they think they know. So let's look at this probe. This probe comes from the NSTA book for Uncovering Student Ideas in Science. Paige Keeley is the co-author of this book. There are several of them, and it is a wonderful resource. I highly recommend them. In this case, we selected a probe called Is It a Rock? Version 2, because sometimes kids don't really know what a rock is. So let's look over this together and see what it is that we find when it comes to student understanding. I will go over the elementary, middle, and high school ways to go about using this probe, as well as the correct answer. So if you're not sure, that's okay. We're here to build your background knowledge too. So let's look at the probe. This can be found with the participant handout that is posted under the module. So here's our module. Your handout is right here, and it's should be the first item in your handout, so you should have full access to this. Ooh. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so what is a rock? How do you decide if something is a rock? We have several rock types that are listed here, things that kids and sometimes even adults would consider to be a rock. So go ahead and take a look at these selections. And I ask that you explain your thinking. So if you need to pause the video here to look over this, decide for yourself what things are rocks before I go over what the answers might be, now would be a good time. To explain our thinking, what rule or reasoning do we use to decide what makes something a rock? So as we look at these different pieces, we have some cement block, dried mud, lava, asphalt known as road tar, glass, and so on. Kids tend to think small means rock. Small, hard, maybe round, depends. They might even say irregular shaped. In this case, if you've taken a second to look at these things and wondered what things are rock and which are not, the things that are rock include coal, the lava, the limestone, the iron ore, the gravestone, the marble, and the granite. Some things that kids might question. Why isn't coral a rock? Why wouldn't concrete be considered a rock? They're both hard, right? Well, let's take a look at what we have when it comes to explaining this probe with kids. For elementary students, we know that they are able to observe and classify objects. They begin to understand that rocks come in natural forms and can be cut, shaped, and polished by humans. So sometimes the human interaction tends to confuse kids with rocks, and it's important to make a point with them that at times we do polish them, but they are still considered rocks, even with the interaction. They begin to understand how some objects and materials exist naturally and others are made by humans, such as the concrete. So combining a bunch of different substances together. Here's the middle school. We start refining ideas. They begin to develop understanding how rocks are formed. So the rock cycle actually is covered in the 6th grade TEKS. So this is where they start figuring out what sedimentary is, what igneous is, what metamorphic is, and so on. They can contrast this information with short-term human processes that develop materials and with science and technology. So lab-created rocks. For high schoolers, we start looking at the geologic processes more in depth and chemical composition. So if you're talking about an earth science course, they're looking more at what elements make up the rocks and where are those elements found. We also look at anything that might be biochemical, how that's involved in cycles. In biology, we look at how living things become parts of rocks. So fossilized remains, they become part of sedimentary rock because of the layering. So if you look at the alignment within the TEKS from the Texas TEKS, and I've listed those for you at the beginning of this session under the first page when we were focusing on those TEKS, you can look and see how the vocabulary builds from grade level to grade level and where you need to be as far as your lane goes. So there's some other additional information that are within this probe, types of resources. How do you administer the probe? Making sure young students understand the words on the list. That word bank helps, but if they don't really understand what the word is, they've never seen it before, it makes it hard. Especially with your ELL students, doing some activities that involve the vocabulary, especially if they've never seen it before, post, and having those words around either on an interactive word wall or something that you put in their notebook that they can reference, that is all very important. For older students who are familiar with examples of the rocks, it mentions here that they may replace some of those vocabulary words with hardened lava or pumice. Things that younger students don't necessarily need to know. It's nice information to know, but again, please make sure you take a look at your TEKS and what vocabulary words your kiddos need to know. So that's just some additional information on the probe, and I hope it helps and that you find it useful in your classroom. If you need more on these probes, you need more information or have any questions, please let me know.